The haunting past. The neon sign outside the Waffle House flickered against the darkness, its dull hum blending with the rhythmic tapping of rain against the glass. Inside, the low murmur of late-night conversations mixed with the clatter of dishes and the occasional sizzle from the grill. The air smelled of burnt coffee and fried bacon, warm, familiar, but far from comforting. Sergeant Daniel Hayes sat in the farthest booth, his back to the wall. It was an old habit, one he had never been able to shake. From here, he could see everything: the waitress refilling a trucker's coffee, the old couple sharing a plate of scrambled eggs, the teenage boy staring at his phone while his mother scrolled through hers. His own coffee sat untouched, its surface a dark mirror reflecting his tired eyes. His fingers absently traced the rim of the cup, his mind somewhere else, somewhere far from this quiet diner, far from this night, far from the weight pressing against his ribs like an iron cage. Tonight was one of those nights. Every year, on this exact date, the memories clawed their way back. They weren't polite about it. They didn't knock. They barged in, kicked over the furniture in his mind, and made themselves at home. The desert heat. The sharp crack of gunfire. The sound of Marcus's voice, steady even in chaos. The smell of blood thick in the air. Daniel exhaled sharply, gripping his coffee cup as if he could squeeze the past out of his bones. "Can I get you a refill, hon?" The voice pulled him back. He blinked and looked up. Linda, the waitress, stood beside his booth, holding a half-full coffee pot. Her curly hair was pulled back, and her uniform was slightly wrinkled, as if she'd been on her feet for too many hours. Her name tag, pinned to her chest, gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Daniel cleared his throat. "I'm good, thanks." She hesitated, giving him a once-over. He had seen that look before, the quiet concern of someone who didn't know your demons but could tell they were there. "You sure?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Yeah." Linda pursed her lips, then sighed. "All right, hon, holler if you need anything." She moved on, leaving him alone with his ghosts. Daniel let his gaze drift to the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. The streets outside were empty, the occasional car passing by with headlights cutting through the mist. And then, the doorbell jingled. Daniel barely glanced up. Late-night customers came and went. But then came the laughter. It was sharp, loud, too full of life for the quiet of the Waffle House at this hour. Two boys, no older than 10 or 11, burst in, shaking off the rain as they stomped their sneakers against the mat near the entrance. They wore matching jackets, one red and one blue, their backpacks slung carelessly over their shoulders. Their energy filled the space like a small storm, cutting through the silence of the late-night diners. "Come on, I'm starving," the older boy said, tugging at his brother's sleeve. "You're always starving," the younger one shot back, rolling his eyes. Daniel smirked slightly. He had no idea who they were, but their presence was grounding. Real. A contrast to the heaviness in his chest. They slid into a booth a few seats away from him, still whispering and giggling. It should have ended there, two kids having a meal, just another night. But then, the older boy's voice dropped to a hush. "Hey, look." Daniel felt their eyes on him before he turned his head. He looked over, and sure enough, the two boys were staring straight at him. Not in the way kids usually gawk at adults, but with something deeper, something searching. He shifted uncomfortably. Then, the older one stood up. Daniel tensed, not out of fear, but out of an old instinct. He had spent years reading body language, assessing threats before they happened. Even now, even in a damn diner, his mind worked the same way. But there was no threat here. Just a kid with big, curious eyes walking toward his table. "Mister?" the boy asked hesitantly. Daniel forced himself to relax. "Yeah?" The boy's gaze dropped to the neatly folded army jacket beside him. Were you in the army? Daniel blinked, caught off guard. He wasn't expecting that. Yeah, he said finally. I was. The boy's face lit up. He turned back to his brother, motioning for him to come over. The younger one hesitated but eventually slid out of his seat and joined them. Our daddy was in the army too, the older one said proudly. Maybe you knew him? Daniel felt his stomach twist. He had met too many men in uniform. Some he called friends. Some he called brothers. Some he carried in his nightmares. Still, he forced a small smile. Maybe. What's his name? The younger boy, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus Caldwell. Everything inside Daniel went still. The air seemed to thicken. The sounds around him faded, the sizzle from the grill, the low hum of conversation, even the rain outside. Marcus Caldwell. His best friend. His brother in arms. The man who had saved his life. And now, standing before him, were Marcus's sons. Daniel's grip on his coffee cup tightened until his knuckles turned white. He felt the past slam into him, harder than a bullet, harder than the years of trying to outrun this exact moment. He had spent so long avoiding Marcus's family, drowning in guilt, in regret. He told himself they were better off not knowing the truth, not knowing what really happened that day. But now the past had found him. And it had two sets of wide, searching eyes. A name that haunts. The name lingered in the air, thick as smoke, choking the breath from Daniel's lungs. Marcus Caldwell. The syllables burned, igniting memories he had spent years trying to bury. The older boy, his face carrying traces of Marcus's sharp jawline and determined eyes, was still looking at him, waiting, hopeful. The younger one, quieter, more reserved, clutched his backpack straps tightly, as if the fabric could somehow anchor him in place. Daniel felt his pulse hammer against his ribs. His throat turned to sandpaper. They were his sons. Marcus's sons. They shouldn't have been here. They shouldn't have found him. Not like this. He fought the instinct to stand, to leave, to disappear before this conversation even began. He had spent years convincing himself that staying away was the right thing to do. But now, looking at these two boys, so young, so unaware of the ghosts that stood between them, he wasn't sure anymore. Sir, the older one prompted, eyes narrowing. Daniel exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the table. He forced himself to keep his voice steady. Yeah, he said finally. I knew your father. The younger boy's eyes widened. The older one, still watching him closely, leaned in slightly. Really? Daniel nodded. But that wasn't enough. He could see the unspoken question forming behind the boy's expression, could hear it even before the words came. What happened to him? Daniel wasn't ready for that. Not yet. How do you know him? The younger one asked. His voice was soft, hesitant, almost afraid to believe it. Daniel swallowed. We served together. That answer wasn't enough either. The older boy straightened. In the war? Daniel nodded again. Yeah. The boy's shoulders squared, as if this revelation meant something profound to him. That's so cool, he said, his voice laced with admiration. Dad was a hero. Daniel flinched, the words hitting like a punch to the gut. A hero. Yeah. That was one way to put it. Another way? A man who gave his life so that Daniel could still be sitting here, in this booth, drinking this coffee, dodging this conversation. Daniel's hands curled into fists beneath the table. He had prepared himself for nightmares. For guilt. For the endless loop of what-ifs that played every time he closed his eyes. But he had never prepared himself for this. For Marcus's children looking up at him with bright eyes, full of hope and curiosity. For the weight of their father's absence pressing down on them in ways they didn't yet understand. For the truth he had carried for years, a truth that didn't belong to him alone. "Did you know him well?" the older boy asked, his voice slightly more serious now. Daniel forced himself to nod. "Yeah," he said. "I did." The younger one suddenly pulled something out of his backpack and placed it on the table. A photograph. Daniel's stomach twisted. He knew before he even looked. But when he did, the breath in his lungs disappeared entirely. It was Marcus, standing in uniform, arms draped over two other soldiers. One of them was a man Daniel didn't recognize. The other? Himself. His own face, younger, sharper, frozen in time beside the man who had saved his life. He hadn't seen this picture in years. He didn't even know it existed. The edges were frayed, the ink slightly faded, but Marcus's smile was the same. The same as it had been before the mission that changed everything. Before Daniel had to watch his best friend fall. His hands trembled as he reached for the photo. "You were his friend," the older boy said, his voice quieter now, more certain. It wasn't a question anymore. Daniel swallowed hard. "Yeah," he whispered. The younger one glanced up, his brows furrowed in confusion. "Then why didn't we ever meet you before?" The question sliced through him. There it was. The one he had been dreading. He could lie. He could tell them that war does strange things, that sometimes people lose touch, that life moves too fast. Or he could tell them the truth. That he hadn't been able to face Marcus's wife. That he had stood outside their house the day of the funeral, watching from a distance, too ashamed to walk up to the door. That he had spent years convincing himself they were better off not knowing him, not knowing what he had lost that day. Not knowing what he had cost them. Daniel clenched his jaw. "They didn't know about me," he finally said. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't stay in touch." The older boy frowned slightly. "But you were friends." It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Daniel looked down at the photo again, at Marcus's grin, wide and full of life, like a man who thought he had all the time in the world. He felt his throat tighten. "We were brothers," he admitted softly. The boys exchanged a look. Daniel could tell they had more questions. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if he could keep dodging them. Because they deserved answers. And maybe he owed them. Before he could say anything else, the doorbell jingled again. Another late-night customer. Daniel didn't bother looking up, until he heard a voice that made his spine go rigid. "You found him?" The boys turned. Daniel's blood ran cold. Because standing in the doorway, rain-soaked and breathless, was a woman he hadn't seen in over a decade. Marcus's wife. The weight of the past. The air inside the Waffle House grew unbearably heavy. Daniel's fingers twitched against the photograph as his eyes locked onto the woman standing in the doorway. Aisha Caldwell. Marcus's wife. He hadn't seen her in over a decade, but time had done little to dim the fire in her gaze. Even drenched from the rain, her presence commanded the room. Her chest rose and fell with uneven breaths as she looked at him, really looked at him. And in her eyes, he saw recognition. Pain. Anger. Daniel swallowed, his throat dry. He had imagined this moment before. Dozens of times. But in every version, he had control, he was prepared. Not ambushed. Not cornered by two boys who carried Marcus's blood in their veins. And definitely not facing Aisha Caldwell when he had nothing to say that could possibly make up for the past. The silence stretched too long. The younger boy, Jaden, looked up at his mother, confused. "Mom?" he asked hesitantly. The older one, Noah, stiffened. His eyes darted between her and Daniel, piecing together what neither adult had said yet. "You knew he was alive," Noah said, his voice quieter than before. Aisha's gaze didn't leave Daniel. "I had a feeling." It wasn't an answer, but it was enough. Daniel exhaled sharply and sat back in the booth. He felt exposed. Like he was back in the desert, caught in the open, bullets kicking up sand around his boots. Aisha stepped forward, her movements deliberate. She stopped just short of his table, arms crossing over her chest. "Guess you don't remember me," she said, her tone unreadable. Daniel let out a humorless chuckle. "I remember." How could he not? He remembered standing next to Marcus at their wedding, watching as his best friend vowed forever to the woman he adored. He remembered the first time Marcus showed him a sonogram picture, beaming as he pointed at the tiny shape on the screen, his firstborn. He remembered the last time he saw her, standing beside an open casket, holding a folded flag to her chest while trying not to break in front of strangers. Yeah. He remembered. Too well. Aisha's expression hardened. "Funny. You didn't remember us when you disappeared." Daniel flinched. He had expected the anger, but hearing it out loud still felt like a slap. Noah and Jaden looked at their mother in shock. "Wait," Noah said, his brow furrowing. You knew him?" Aisha finally turned to her son, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Yeah, baby," she said, her voice softer. "I knew him." She looked back at Daniel. "He was your father's best friend." Jaden's jaw dropped. "What?" Daniel ran a hand over his face, struggling to breathe. The walls were closing in. He should have left. He should have never let them sit down. Noah's fists clenched. "So you were there. You knew him. You were in the war together. But he swallowed, his expression tightening. "You never told us." Aisha didn't look away from Daniel. "Because he was gone." The words hit harder than they should have. Daniel looked away, his jaw tightening. She wasn't wrong. After Marcus died, he wasn't the same person anymore. And the guilt had followed him like a shadow, growing longer with each passing year. Jaden still looked confused. "But if he was Dad's friend, why didn't we ever see him?" Aisha exhaled, but this time, her anger had been replaced with something heavier. Pain. Daniel forced himself to meet her gaze. Because he knew she wouldn't look away first. "You want the truth?" Aisha asked, her voice quieter now. Daniel felt his throat tighten. No. He wasn't ready. But she gave it to him anyway. "Because he couldn't face us," she said. The words landed like a fist to his ribs. Jaden's face scrunched in confusion. Noah, though, was starting to understand. Daniel could see it in his eyes. "You left," Noah said. It wasn't a question. Daniel swallowed hard. "Yeah," he admitted. No excuses. No explanations. Just the truth. Noah's jaw clenched. "Did my dad die for you?" Silence. The words sliced through him. Jaden looked up, eyes wide, not yet comprehending the full weight of the question. Aisha didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't save him. Daniel forced himself to look at Noah. And then, for the first time in years, he spoke the truth. "Yeah," he whispered. He did. Jaden's breath hitched. Noah's fists trembled. Daniel felt his own shame wrapping around his throat like a noose. It would have been easier if Noah had yelled. If he had punched him. But instead, the boy nodded. Slowly. Like he had already known, he just needed to hear Daniel admit it. "Why?" Jaden whispered. Daniel closed his eyes. "Because I hesitated. Because I was afraid. Because I made a mistake." There was an ambush, Daniel said, his voice rough. We were pinned down. I should have moved faster, should have gotten to cover, but I... The words caught in his throat. Marcus had saved him. At the cost of his own life. I should have been the one to die that day, Daniel finished, his voice hollow. Jaden gasped softly. Noah just stared. Aisha closed her eyes. The tension in the diner was suffocating. Rosa, the waitress, lingered near the counter, pretending to wipe something down, but her hands were shaking. Daniel exhaled and looked down. I didn't come back because I didn't deserve to. Noah's jaw was tight. His shoulders shook slightly. That's not your decision, he muttered. Daniel frowned. What? Noah clenched his fists. His voice was rough. That's not your decision, he said louder. To decide whether we got to know you or not. Daniel blinked. You weren't the only one who lost him, Noah snapped. We did too. Mom did too. But you just left. Daniel's gut twisted. Jaden sniffled, rubbing his eyes. Noah's chest rose and fell rapidly. You could have been there, he said. Even if it hurt. Even if it was hard. But instead, you ran. Daniel felt something break inside him. The guilt, the shame, it had been a storm inside him for years. But hearing it from Marcus's son? That was different. Aisha finally spoke. Why now, Daniel? Her voice was soft, but the weight behind it was crushing. Why now? Daniel looked at the boys. At Marcus's sons. And for the first time, he had no answer. No excuse. Only regret. The silence stretched. Finally, Noah stood. His hands trembled as he shoved them into his pockets. Come on, Jay, he muttered. We should go. Jaden hesitated. But when he saw the pain in his mother's eyes, he slowly slid off the seat. Aisha lingered a moment longer. Then, finally, she turned. Daniel sat there, staring at his hands, as the door swung shut behind them. And for the first time in years, he had nowhere to run. The echoes of the past. The diner felt hollow without them. The moment Aisha and the boys walked out, a heavy silence filled the space they left behind. It wasn't just the absence of their voices, it was the weight of what had been left unsaid. Daniel sat motionless, staring at his hands as if the answers he needed could be found in the deep lines of his weathered skin. But there were no answers. Only regret. Only ghosts. A sharp clatter startled him. Rosa, the waitress, had dropped a fork behind the counter. She muttered a curse under her breath, but when she straightened, her eyes found him. You gonna sit there all night? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Daniel blinked, as if waking from a daze. He hadn't realized how still he had been. His coffee had gone cold, the untouched plate of eggs congealed under the fluorescent lights. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Didn't mean to linger. Rosa didn't move from behind the counter. That woman, she meant something to you, didn't she? Daniel huffed a bitter laugh. Yeah, he admitted. She did. Rosa studied him for a long moment, then walked around the counter, sliding into the booth across from him. Can I give you some advice? She asked, crossing her arms. Daniel glanced up. Rosa had been working at this diner for as long as he could remember. She had that hard-earned wisdom that came from a lifetime of watching people make mistakes. And right now, she was looking at him like he was the biggest fool she'd ever seen. Daniel sighed. You're gonna give it to me whether I ask or not, aren't you? Rosa smirked. Damn right. She leaned forward. You walked out on that family once. Don't you dare do it again. Her words hit harder than he expected. Daniel swallowed. You think I have a choice? You always have a choice, Rosa shot back. But you're too damn scared to make the right one. Daniel clenched his jaw. And what is the right one? Fix what you broke, she said simply. It ain't gonna be easy, and it damn sure ain't gonna be quick, but if you care about those boys, even a little, you'll try. Daniel exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Try. That word felt impossible. How do you even begin to fix something when it's been broken for over a decade? When it was your fault it shattered in the first place? His eyes drifted to the window. The rain had let up, but the night outside felt just as heavy. He could still see their silhouettes in his mind, Aisha's tense shoulders, Noah's clenched fists, Jaden's wide, confused eyes. He thought about Marcus. If their roles had been reversed, if Marcus had been the one left standing, would he have run? Would he have left Daniel's family behind? No. Marcus would have stayed. Marcus would have been there. The thought made Daniel's chest ache. You don't understand, he muttered, rubbing his temples. I don't deserve to be in their lives. Rosa tilted her head. Who told you that? Daniel's jaw tightened. She leaned forward, voice softer now. Was it them? Or was it just you? That made him pause. Rosa shook her head. Guilt is a funny thing, sweetheart. It'll make you believe you ain't worth a damn. But those boys? They don't need a perfect man. They need to know their father's best friend didn't just vanish into thin air. Daniel's throat felt tight. He had spent years believing that his absence was the only way to make up for what happened. But had it? Had it really? Or had he just been taking the easy way out? Before he could answer, the diner door swung open. Daniel's heart nearly stopped. Aisha was standing there. Alone. Her face was unreadable, but there was something different in her eyes. Something that made his pulse quicken. She stepped inside, hesitating for only a second before walking toward him. Rosa took that as her cue to leave, standing with a knowing smirk before disappearing behind the counter. Aisha sat across from Daniel, her hands folded on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, she sighed. They're in the car. Daniel frowned. The boys? Aisha nodded. Noah's pissed. Jaden's confused. But. She exhaled sharply, glancing toward the window. I couldn't just leave it like that. Something flickered in Daniel's chest. Aisha ran a hand through her damp curls. I don't know what I expected when I saw you again, she admitted. But it sure as hell wasn't this. Daniel swallowed. I didn't expect it either. Silence. Aisha tapped her fingers against the table, her lips pressing into a thin line. Do you even know what you left behind? Daniel looked down. I thought I was doing what was best. Aisha huffed a bitter laugh. For who? He had no answer. She shook her head. You think I didn't want to disappear too, Daniel? You think I didn't want to pack up my kids and run as far away from that grief as possible? Her voice broke slightly. But I couldn't, she continued. Because I had two boys looking up at me, waiting for me to tell them that everything was going to be okay, even when I didn't believe it myself. Daniel clenched his fists. And you? Aisha's gaze sharpened. You just vanished. Guilt burned in his gut. I was a coward, he admitted. Aisha blinked. I should have been there, Daniel whispered. For you. For them. But I didn't know how. Aisha studied him for a long moment. Finally, she sighed. You're here now. Daniel's eyes snapped up. She gave him a tired look. I don't know if that means anything. I don't even know if it's enough. But if you're really here, if you're really staying, you need to prove it. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. How? He rasped. Aisha met his gaze. You start by showing up, she said. Not just for me. Not just for Marcus's memory. But for them. She looked toward the window. Daniel followed her gaze. Noah and Jaden were in the car, watching from a distance. Waiting. Hesitating. Daniel's heart pounded. This was it. The moment he had spent years avoiding. The question wasn't whether he was ready. It was whether he was finally brave enough to try. Aisha exhaled. So? What's it gonna be, Daniel? The door loomed in front of him like a challenge. A choice. He had walked away once. Would he do it again? Or would he take the first step toward fixing what he broke? Daniel inhaled sharply. Then, slowly, finally, he stood. The road back. The door to the diner felt heavier than it should have. Daniel stood there, frozen, staring through the rain-streaked glass at the car parked outside. His best friend's sons sat inside, watching him, waiting for something, anything, from him. For over a decade, he had been a ghost in their lives. Now, for the first time, he had a choice. Step forward, or walk away again. He exhaled sharply. Aisha hadn't moved from her seat. She wasn't urging him. She wasn't begging. She had put the decision entirely in his hands. And that terrified him. His feet felt like lead as he pushed the door open. The cold air hit him like a slap, but he barely noticed. Each step toward the car echoed in his mind like the sound of a hammer driving nails into a coffin. When he reached the driver's side window, Noah didn't roll it down. Instead, the teenager just stared at him, his face locked in a mask of defiance. Daniel knocked gently on the glass. Nothing. He knocked again. Noah. A long beat passed before the window finally lowered a crack. Noah's face was unreadable. His jaw clenched, the same way Marcus's used to when he was pissed. You forget something? Noah asked coldly. Daniel swallowed. No. Then why are you here? Daniel let out a breath. Because I should have been here a long time ago. Noah scoffed, shaking his head. Too late for that. Jaden, sitting in the passenger seat, looked between them, his eyes wide. Uncertain. Daniel's gut twisted. He didn't expect this to be easy. He didn't even expect them to give him a second chance. But he had to try. He glanced at Jaden. You probably don't remember me, he said carefully. You were still small when he hesitated. When I left. Jaden shifted uncomfortably, but there was a flicker of recognition in his gaze. Mom has pictures, he murmured. You and Dad. And us. Daniel's chest tightened. Marcus had always carried his camera, snapping photos of every moment, big or small. Those pictures were all they had left of him now. Noah's grip on the steering wheel tightened. So what? You feel bad now? You want to come back and play Uncle Daniel like nothing happened? Daniel sighed. I know I can't change what I did. I know I let you both down. Noah's eyes darkened. You let him down. Daniel's breath caught. Noah wasn't just talking about himself. He was talking about Marcus. And it was true. Daniel had failed his best friend in the worst way possible. He had run when he should have stayed. But Marcus wasn't here to be angry at him. Noah was. And Noah had every damn right to be. You're right, Daniel admitted. I let him down. I let all of you down. Silence. Noah's nostrils flared, and for a second, it looked like he was about to yell. But instead, he turned away, jaw clenched, fighting back something else. Something deeper. Something like hurt. Daniel hesitated. I know I don't deserve another chance. But I don't want to run anymore. Jaden looked up at him, his young face filled with curiosity. Then what do you want? Daniel exhaled. To make things right. If you'll let me. Another silence. Then, slowly, Jaden turned to his brother. Noah's expression was unreadable, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Daniel waited, heart pounding. Finally, Noah let out a harsh breath. Get in the damn car, he muttered. Daniel blinked. What? Noah shot him a glare. You said you want to make things right? Start by not leaving again. Daniel's chest ached. This wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. But it was something. Without another word, he pulled open the backseat door and climbed inside. As Noah started the engine, Aisha walked out of the diner, watching them with careful eyes. She didn't say anything. But as the car pulled away from the curb, Daniel caught the faintest hint of something in her expression. Maybe, just maybe, it was hope. A debt that cannot be repaid. The road stretched ahead, swallowed by the darkness of the night. The rain had eased to a drizzle, tapping lightly against the windshield as Noah drove in silence. Jaden sat beside him, arms crossed, glancing occasionally at Daniel in the back seat. Daniel felt like an intruder. For years, he had convinced himself that staying away was the best thing he could do for Marcus's family. That his presence would only remind them of what they had lost. But now, sitting in the car with Marcus's sons, he realized that his absence had done just as much damage as his guilt. What kind of man abandons the children of the friend who saved his life? The answer was simple: a coward. He had been a coward for too long. Where are we going? Daniel asked finally, breaking the silence. Noah didn't take his eyes off the road. Home. Daniel's stomach twisted. Home. Their home. The place he had never returned to after Marcus's funeral. Mom, know I'm coming? He asked. Noah scoffed. What do you think? Daniel sighed. He should have expected that. He rubbed his hands together, his nerves prickling with unease. Maybe I should talk to her first. Give her some time. You had time, Noah snapped. You had 12 years. Daniel swallowed hard. Jaden shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Maybe we should let Mom decide, he muttered. Noah's grip on the wheel tightened, but he didn't argue. The drive stretched on in tense silence. The weight of all the years between them sat like a heavy stone in Daniel's chest. Then, before he was ready, they pulled up in front of the house. It looked the same. The blue siding was slightly faded, but the porch light still flickered in that way Marcus used to grumble about fixing. The old oak tree in the front yard stood tall, its branches swaying gently in the night breeze. And the mailbox still had Williams written in Marcus's careful handwriting. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Jaden was the first to step out. He hesitated for a moment before jogging up the porch steps and pushing open the front door. Noah turned off the engine but didn't move. She's not gonna be happy to see you, he muttered. Daniel exhaled. I know. Noah shook his head, gripping the wheel like he wanted to strangle it. I used to think you were dead. Daniel's heart stopped. Noah didn't look at him. His voice was quiet, but heavy. When I was a kid, I asked Mom why you never came. She said you needed time. Said you were hurting. A bitter chuckle escaped his lips. I thought maybe you had died too. Maybe you just never made it back from that deployment, and no one told us. Daniel felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. He had been so focused on his own pain, his own guilt, that he had never considered what his absence had done to Marcus's boys. I'm sorry, Daniel said, his voice rough. I should have been here. Noah clenched his jaw. Yeah. You should have. He shoved the door open and stepped out. Daniel followed. His boots felt heavier than ever as he climbed the porch steps. His pulse pounded in his ears as he stepped inside. The house smelled the same. Warm spices from the kitchen. Faint traces of Marcus's old cologne lingering in the air. And then, "Auntie Aisha, he's here." Jaden called down the hall. Footsteps. Then, a voice that made Daniel's stomach twist. "Who's here, baby?" She stepped into view. Aisha Williams hadn't changed much. A few more lines on her face, a few more streaks of silver in her braids. But her eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, were exactly the same. And when they landed on Daniel, they widened in disbelief. The air in the room seemed to thin. She blinked once, twice, as if trying to make sure he was real. Then her expression hardened. Noah crossed his arms. He wanted to come. Aisha's gaze snapped to her son. "And you let him?" Daniel cleared his throat. "Aisha, No." Her voice was steel. "You don't get to talk first." Daniel shut his mouth. She took a step forward, eyes locked on his, searching. Measuring. He had faced enemy fire. He had been in the middle of war zones. But standing there, under the weight of Aisha's gaze, he had never felt smaller. "You have a lot of nerve," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "I know. You disappeared. I know. You left us." Daniel's throat tightened. "I know." She shook her head. "No, Daniel. I don't think you do." Her hands trembled slightly as she exhaled. "You were his best friend," she said. "And you left." The weight of her words crushed him. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "I prayed for you. I worried about you. And then I found out you were alive." Her voice cracked. "You were alive, and you never came back." Daniel's chest ached with the pain in her voice. "I wanted to," he said softly. "I was." "Don't you dare say you were hurting," she snapped. "We were all hurting, Daniel. But we had to keep going. We had to live. And you? You ran." Daniel swallowed against the lump in his throat. She was right. He had run. Aisha wiped at her eyes before shaking her head. "Why now?" Daniel hesitated. "Because I finally realized that I don't just owe Marcus my life," he said. "I owe him my presence. I owe you all, something more than a memory." She studied him, her gaze unreadable. Then, after a long moment, she sighed. "You can stay for dinner," she muttered. "One dinner. That's it." Daniel's breath left him in a rush. He nodded. "Okay." She turned toward the kitchen without another word. Jaden gave Daniel a small, hopeful smile before following her. Noah, however, lingered. "You hurt her," Noah said quietly. "You hurt all of us." Daniel nodded. "I know." Noah narrowed his eyes. "One dinner doesn't fix that." Daniel exhaled. "No. But it's a start." For a moment, Noah just stared at him. Then, with a small shake of his head, he turned and followed his mother. Daniel stood there, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. The past couldn't be undone. Marcus was gone. But maybe, just maybe, this was the first step toward making peace with the family he left behind. Maybe this was his road back. And this time, he wouldn't run.